The Bristol Beaufighter was a British heavy fighter, strike aircraft and torpedo bomber manufactured by the Bristol Aeroplane Company. First flying on the 17th of July 1939, it was introduced in service just 1 year later, on the 27th of July 1940. Derived from the Bristol Beaufort, 5,928 Beaufighters were built between 1940 and 1946, serving with distinction for 20 years until retired in 1960. Its primary users were the Royal Air Force, Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm, the Royal Canadian Air Force, the Royal Australian Air Force, and even the United States Army Air Force. The Beaufighter showed its merits in its initial role as a night fighter during the Battle of Britain, but with the introduction of the faster de Havilland Mosquito in mid to late 1942, the heavier Beaufighter shifted to make valuable contributions in other areas, such as anti-shipping, ground attack, and long-range interdiction in every major theatre of operations of World War II. The concept of the Beaufighter originated in 1938 during the Munich crisis, when the Bristol Aeroplane Company identified the Royal Air Force's urgent need for a long-range fighter capable of carrying heavy payloads for maximum impact. An evaluation of the Beaufort revealed that its wings, nacelles, undercarriage, and tail possessed significant structural strength and rigidity, suggesting it could be adapted for higher speed and maneuverability, akin to a fighter-class aircraft. Under the leadership of Leslie Fries, the Bristol design team initiated the development of a cannon-armed fighter derivative as a private venture. This new aircraft was designed to share the same production jigs as the Beaufort, allowing for seamless transition between the two models in manufacturing. As a torpedo bomber and aerial reconnaissance aircraft, the Beaufort's performance was relatively modest. To achieve the desired fighter-like performance for the Beaufighter, Bristol proposed equipping it with a pair of their new Hercules engines, each capable of producing approximately 1,500 horsepower, replacing the 1,000 horsepower Bristol Taurus engines used in the Beauforts. The Hercules engines were significantly larger and more powerful, necessitating the use of larger propellers to ensure adequate ground clearance. The engines were mounted centrally on the wing, rather than in the underslung position found on the Beauforts. The project, internally designated Type 156, was outlined in October 1938, and by March 1939, it was officially named Beaufighter. On the 17th of July 1939, the first unarmed prototype, designated R2052, undertook its maiden flight just over 8 months after the formal commencement of development. The rapid progress in development can be attributed in part to the extensive reuse of design elements and identical components from the Beaufort. Initially, R2052 was operated by Bristol for testing purposes at Filton Aerodrome. Early modifications to the prototype included stiffening the elevator control circuit, increasing the fin area, and lengthening the main oleo strut of the undercarriage to better accommodate weight increases and withstand hard landings. During pre-delivery trials, R2052, powered by 2-speed supercharged Hercules 1YS engines, achieved a speed of 335 miles per hour at an altitude of 16,800 feet in a clean configuration. The Beaufighter Mark I was born. As with the preceding Beaufort, the Beaufighter exhibited weak longitudinal stability and poor flight characteristics, with a 57-foot 10-inch wingspan and an empty weight of 15,592 pounds. It was heavy on the controls and not easy to fly, with landing being a particular challenge for inexperienced pilots. The Beaufighter's armament was strategically placed on the lower fuselage and wings. Unlike the Beaufort, which featured a bomb bay, the Beaufighter omitted this component but retained the capability to carry a small bomb load externally. Indeed, the RAAF Coastal Command version, the Mark I-C, was modified to carry up to 1,000 pounds of bomb ordnance. However, the Beaufighter's true offensive capability lay in its gun array. 4 forward-firing 20mm Hispano Mark III cannons were mounted in the lower fuselage. Initially, These cannons were fed by 60-round drums, necessitating the radar operator to manually change the ammunition drums, an arduous and unpopular task, particularly during night operations and while pursuing enemy bombers. This system was soon replaced by a more efficient belt feed mechanism. In addition to the cannons, the Beaufighter was equipped with 6 303 Browning machine guns installed in the wings, with 4 on the starboard side and 2 on the port side, the asymmetry due to the port mounting of the landing light. This configuration provided the Beaufighter with one of the heaviest, if not the heaviest, fighter armaments of its era, earning it the moniker of the 10-gun terror. Indeed, the substantial recoil from the cannons and machine guns could reduce the aircraft's speed by up to 28 miles per hour, a testament to the significant power of its weaponry. Later versions were adapted to use 8 RP-3 60-pound rockets, or a British 18-inch torpedo. It was highly efficient in both roles, earning the affectionate nicknames the Rockbow and Torbo. The Mark I-F, operating with radar units on its open nose, performed outstandingly during the Battle of Britain. On the 20th of November 1940, the first kill, a Junkers Ju-88, by a radar-equipped Beaufighter occurred. The AI Mark IV radar was the world's first operational air-to-air radar system, and arguably played a major role in ending the Blitz, the Luftwaffe's night bombing campaign of late 1940 and early 1941. However, the demand for Hercules engines to power other aircraft, such as the short Stirling bomber, posed a potential risk to the Beaufighter's production rate. Consequently, these concerns generated significant interest in exploring alternative engines for the aircraft. Roy Fedden, the chief designer of Bristol's engine division, was a strong proponent of equipping the Beaufighter with the improved Hercules 6 engine. However, this option was soon set aside in favor of the rival Griffon engine, as the Hercules still required extensive development. Since Griffon production was allocated exclusively to the Fairey Firefly, the Air Ministry chose the Rolls-Royce Merlin to power the Beaufighter until the manufacturing capacity of the Hercules could be increased. Introduced in late April 1941, the standard Merlin 20-powered aircraft subsequently became known as the Beaufighter Mark II, now equipped with AI Mark VII radar. The Beaufighter continued to show its merits as a night fighter, but as the faster de Havilland Mosquito took over as the main night fighter in mid to late 1942, the heavier Beaufighter shifted role and contributed heavily in other areas, such as anti-shipping, ground attack, and long-range interdiction in every major theatre of operations. From Coastal Command, they forayed into occupied Europe, and with 50-gallon tanks from the Vickers Wellington giving extended range, they attacked enemy shipping in European waters. In December 1941, Beaufighters participated in Operation Archery, providing suppressing fire while British commandos landed on the occupied Norwegian island of Vagsøy. In 1942, long-range patrols of the Bay of Biscay were routinely conducted by Beaufighters, intercepting aircraft such as the Ju-88 and Fokker-Wulf Condor operating against Allied anti-submarine patrols. In June 1941, the Beaufighter equipped RAAF 272 Squadron, based on Malta under the command of Wing Commander Robert Yaxley, claimed the destruction of 49 enemy aircraft and the damaging of 42 more, with devastating attacks on aerodromes and seaplane bases, earning Yaxley the Distinguished Flying Cross. The 272 Squadron success continued in the Western Desert, where Yaxley was awarded the Distinguished Service Order, his citation states. In addition to a daily toll of enemy aircraft destroyed, heavy casualties have been inflicted on ground crews, while lines of communication have been harassed and petrol tankers set on fire. Altogether, within a space of 6 days' operations, no fewer than 46 of the enemy's aircraft were destroyed. Yaxley and his squadron proved just how invaluable the Beaufighter was in the desert campaign. Most famously, on the 12th of June 1942, a Beaufighter conducted a truly audacious raid, in which a Beaufighter Mark I of No. 236 Squadron flew from Thorney Island to occupied Paris at an extremely low altitude in daylight to drop a tricolore on the Arc de Triomphe, and then proceed to strafe the Gestapo headquarters in the Place de la Concorde. The next full production variant arrived mid-1942. The Beaufighter Mark VI, fitted with the more powerful Hercules 6 and 16 engines, entered the war as an even more effective maritime strike aircraft, carrying rockets or an 18-inch torpedo. The Northcotes Strike Wing of Coastal Command, based at RAAF Northcotes on the Lincolnshire coast, developed tactics that combined large formations of Beaufighters using cannons and rockets to suppress flak, while the Torbeaus attacked at low level with torpedoes. These tactics were put into practice in mid-1943, and in 10 months, 29,762 tons of shipping were sunk. The Northcotes Strike Wing operated as the largest anti-shipping force of the Second World War and accounted for over 150,000 tons of shipping and 117 vessels. This was half the total tonnage sunk by all strike wings between 1942 and 1945. In the Mediterranean, the United States Army Air Force's 414th, 415th, 416th, and the 417th Night Fighter Squadrons received 100 Beaufighter in the summer of 1943, achieving their first victory in July of that year. Throughout the summer, these squadrons engaged in daytime convoy escort and ground attack missions, but primarily operated as night fighters. Despite the arrival of the Northrop P-61 Black Widow fighter in December 1944, USAAF Beaufighter continued to conduct night operations in Italy and France until late in the war. The Beaufighter arrived at squadrons in Asia and the Pacific in mid-1942. Reportedly, Japanese soldiers called it the Whispering Death for its quiet engines. In the Southeast Asian theatre, the Beaufighter Mark VI-F operated from India as a night fighter and participated in missions against Japanese lines of communication in Burma and Thailand. Additionally, Mark X Beaufighters conducted long-range daylight intruder missions over Burma. These high-speed, low-level attacks proved highly effective, despite frequently encountering atrocious weather conditions and relying on makeshift repair and maintenance facilities. The Royal Australian Air Force was a prominent operator of the Beaufighter during the Second World War. On the 20th of April 1942, the RAAF received its first Beaufighter IC, a designation encompassing various models including the Beaufighter 6C, Beaufighter 10, and Beaufighter 9C imported from Britain. The final aircraft was delivered on the 20th of August 1945. Initial deliveries were assigned to No. 30 Squadron in New Guinea and No. 31 Squadron in northwest Australia. Before the locally produced DAP Beaufighters reached RAAF units in the Southwest Pacific Theatre, the Beaufighter Mark I was frequently used for anti-shipping missions. The Australian-made DAP Beaufighter. The Mark 21 changes included Hercules 18 engines, 4 20mm cannons in the nose, 4 Browning 50 caliber machine guns in the wings, and the capacity to carry 8.5 in high-velocity aircraft rockets, 2 250-pound bombs, 2 500-pound bombs, and 1 Mark 13 torpedo. It was fair to say the fledgling Australian aircraft manufacturing, directed by the Department of Aircraft Production, struggled to even deliver the Mark 21 by 1944, quite late in the war. The Mark 7, Mark 8, and Mark 9 were all proposed Australian-built variants not built as they struggled to evolve the aircraft to their own. But due to an embargo by the British government on war material after the fall of France, Australia had no choice but to locally manufacture its aircraft of choice. And in fairness, the DAP experience in producing Beauforts beforehand, by all accounts a steep learning curve, did mean the Australian managed production of 365 Mark 21s by 1946. One of the most notable engagements of the Pacific was the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, where Beaufighters played a crucial role in fire suppression alongside USAAF Douglas, A-20 Boston, and North American B-25 Mitchell bombers. Earlier in the battle, 8 Beauforts from No. 100 Squadron RAAF had unsuccessfully attempted to torpedo the Japanese convoy. Subsequently, 13 Beaufighters from No. 30 Squadron attacked at mast height, delivering heavy suppressive fire. Mistakenly believing they were facing torpedo attacks from Beauforts, the Japanese ships turned towards the Beaufighters, exposing themselves to severe strafing that incapacitated their anti-aircraft defenses, bridges, and crews. This action facilitated successful mast-height bombing and skip bombing by the US medium bombers, resulting in the sinking of 8 transports and 4 destroyers at the cost of 5 Allied aircraft, including 1 Beaufighter. The role of the Beaufighters in the Battle of the Bismarck Sea was famously documented by war correspondent and filmmaker Damien Para, who flew during the engagement behind the pilot of a No. 30 Squadron aircraft. This battle contributed to the Beaufighter renown in Australian service. By the end of the war, some 70 pilots serving with RAF units had become aces while flying Beaufighters, cementing its reputation as one of the greatest and underrated aircraft of World War II. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment, a like, and subscribe to the channel.